Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the BCS IT Leaders Forum event webinar called Overcoming the Challenges of a Dispersed Workforce. Just a little bit of housekeeping and a bit of explanation on the format. So I'm going to do an introduction and then the speakers, as I introduce the speakers, they'll be given 1 minute, 2 minutes to talk about themselves and the business before they provide their insights. At the end of the three speakers, we'll do a panel session. So we'd like you to make sure if you've got any questions that you add it to the questions box that you'll see on your little control panel. And then I'll vet those questions and give it to the presenters at the end of their three presentations. If that's okay. So what is this event about? So we've all experienced coronavirus, everybody's been impacted by this, especially those in the NHS. So when we put this project, this event together, we wanted to find out at the in the trenches, what happened at the NHS, how do they cope with COVID and remote working, and what are the things they had to do to get it all working. And we've got a great lineup of speakers. We've got Paul Richards, who's a non-exec for an NHS trust, who will cover the challenge from an NHS leadership perspective, the things they had to consider and do. We've got Dr. John McCarthy, who's a cyber expert and a risk advisor, who will demo how quickly you will have your computers compromised and therefore your workforce. Lastly, the last person is David Overton, who has worked for Microsoft, as now is working for the only gold partner for Wingu, which is a virtual desktop technology. And he'll cover the valuable insights and some of the success stories with the NHS during the early stages of COVID. So that way we get a rounded event, a leadership perspective on what challenges there were there, and we've all experienced them in one way or another. A demo how quickly you can get hacked, and then some of the solutions, some of the heroes I like to call, who actually help the NHS achieve, secure access for their workforce. So the first speaker I'm going to introduce is Paul Richards, and let me pass on 1 second. Okay, so I lost my, there we go. Sorry about that, Paul Richards, and over to you. Hello, Paul.
Hello, have you got me there?
Yeah, okay, it's coming up now.
Yeah, I had a small technical dilemma there. So let me just tell you a little bit about where we were. Hopefully you can all see my my screen there. Now, I've worked for about 14 years within the NHS with CIO, information director roles, even when we didn't call them those kinds of things. But latterly I was the CIO at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals, and at that time I was managing things like the full data center, clinical coding, all the information provision for the trust, as well as other things like medical illustration and so on. And I left the NHS to join the private sector, and almost immediately began leading health tech companies around the world. I worked for McKesson Corporation, who are a large drugs retail and sourcing outfit. They now own brands such as Lloyd's Pharmacy, but they had a large IT division as well, providing IT systems to providers around the world, but particularly in the UK, Europe, and Canada, but also America in a big way. I've worked with IBM and led their healthcare business within Global Business Services for a number of years. I've also led some smaller niche players. But I'm passionate about the role that digital technology can play in improving the way that health services are provided and improving outcomes, health outcomes. I've been the SRO of hundreds of business critical projects and programs worldwide. I'm currently a non-executive director of Torbay and South Devon hospitals, which is an integrated care organisation, which means that we provide services to community, social care, as well as acute care, and we provide a whole gamut of services to the southwest. And increasingly, we're part of a integrated care system across Devon. My day job is that I advise companies and boards on digital health tech, commercial turnaround, and strategic planning and governance, as well as advise companies who are looking to work in health nationally and internationally. I think what I need to do really is to set the context, because prior to COVID, the NHS was already straining, and there was a shortage of key, trained, experienced resources. And what COVID did was to turn the whole of the NHS inside down, back to front, inside out, and created a whole range of new issues. The great thing about the NHS is that it's more flexible than it is often credited. And we saw a massive change across all services and sectors, which happened virtually immediately. And there was rapid changes in what was done and how it's provided. And we took down services to focus on emergency care and on intensive care, away from booked procedures. And I think it's fair to say that what has taken and would have taken years to happen from a digital perspective suddenly became necessary, and therefore blocks are moved out of the way to make it possible. And what the NHS must now do is to capture that innovation and learning, and more about that later. But we end up with a huge backlog of treatments at this moment in time, and it's easier to close things down than it is to resume things again, because the restrictions around things like infection control, social distancing, has severely cut productivity. And what we need to do is to move to a digital first strategy and change the way that services are provided with digital as a tool. And that's now even more vital than ever before. And we hear the likes of Matt Hancock talking about that, about creating better services, moving to care at place, as they call it, meaning closer to the patient. Also recently, the NHS brought a people plan out, and that people plan is aimed at improving the workforce. Because as you all know, the digital tools exist, it's how you implement them and how you use them to transform the way that you work. So what is key here is how we move the people, and there's about 1.5 million of them across the NHS, to working differently and embracing new ways of working supported by technology. There's also things about the culture, and we've seen how the culture is absolutely vital to keeping systems working, but it's also, the culture needs to change really, away from buildings and towards care in other settings enabled by technology. So COVID-19 occurred, and that meant a sudden switch to digital care and telemedicine. Virtual consultations suddenly became a thing, and suppliers began enabling their software to be used sometimes free of charge on a try before you buy basis, sometimes on a mechanism that the license will be paid eventually. But home working suddenly became a thing in the NHS on a massive scale. And whilst a fragment of workers potentially work from home on a day when they were having their carpet fitted or whatever, it suddenly meant that home working for people who weren't necessarily going to be on site in front of a patient, treating patient, providing hands-on care, they suddenly had not just an option, but it was mandated that they needed to stay away to cut the risk of infection. And pretty much for me as an NHS worker on the board and on a range of various committees, IT committees and so on, it meant that Microsoft Teams became my way of meeting anybody in the NHS. And people went from rookie level using that technology to being at guru level in terms of how to switch to remote working. What was amazing was that it put everybody in the same boat, and suddenly working from home became something that was acceptable, and people acknowledged that people have got dogs, family, postmen, and it leveled the playing field towards home workers. And the more that playing field became level, then the more people just used remote working as a day-to-day thing, and that happened really over just a couple of weeks. So video conferencing became not a novelty but a necessity. It was just the way that we did things around here, and it meant training at scale on these new technologies. But for most people, it meant actually you just got to find a way to use the technology. You had a license and you installed it on the device that you needed to install it on. But people who were used to having desktops in the office suddenly found they were no use anymore. So workers demanded that laptops and mobile tech was made available to them. And that put huge pressure on the supply chain, and some of you might have seen that. And there was a necessity for us to have access to mobile devices, tablets, laptops, and a demand for more licensed software than we'd ever seen before, and additional storage, additional support. It was suddenly necessary to have greater bandwidth into the hospital, not just across the NHS-wide network, but also so that people get into the NHS-wide network from their own homes. And I have to say, telecom workers really, and telecoms providers really stepped up to make that happen. The delays were minimal, and routers, firewalls all became reconfigured to deal with all of this. Concurrency went up from some systems to hundreds to thousands of users in each individual organization within a matter of weeks. But that put a huge reliance on existing security arrangements, and we'll hear some more about that later from the other guys on the webinar. But new workarounds had to be invented to cut the huge reliance on paper, because even though we had the digital systems, we still had a huge reliance on input documents from clinics or from patient paper records. And whilst some hospitals have implemented electronic patient records, and that's been my background for years, developing electronic patient record systems and delivering them, most organizations have yet to move away from paper records. Now, follow me printing hugely advantaged some organizations because they had an ability to print things out at work and have it couriered across to them if that was necessary. But the workarounds were just phenomenal. So thinking about the problems that we're left with and how we resolve those, I think it's going to be necessary to redefine the role of IT and digital going forward. We need to rationalize end user devices that were handed out at haste, because you can't have people having 2 and 3 different computers. The NHS just can't afford that. So we need to rein them in and make sure that people have got what they needed. Too many organizations have layered new technology on old processes, and we've all seen this happen in other industries. But this has happened at major scale across 1.5 million workers, and we need to redefine the way that processes work and have technology as a way of enabling new ways of working. All of this will be food and drink to you guys. But we need more and more system working across the NHS, less reliance on buildings, and seamless connectivity between Hospital A, Hospital B, the community, social care, education, third sector. And so that means that we need to redesign services across these organizations, which means a rewrite of the digital strategy, right? It means developing a way to enable technology to redefine the way that healthcare can be provided, which means partnering across health and social care and other care sectors regionally, providing new ways of working and providing new services because of those new ways of working is going to be absolutely critical. So that kind of serves as my introduction to this topic to enable the other guys to get into the meat of what you're here to hear about. But one final thought that I would give is that the NHS has a checkered history in its use of digital and IT adoption. But the COVID-19 crisis has shown time and time again that the NHS consistently achieves remarkable things when working together to a clear and common purpose. And it's that clear and common purpose that I think we need to focus on. We need to ensure that digital is given that common purpose and that there is proper partnership with the health tech industry, suppliers, transformation specialists who can unlock that potential for our fabulous NHS. And as entrepreneurs, leaders and specialists on this webinar, you may well choose to be part of that solution. So that's all I was going to talk about. Later on we can have some questions, and so I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and hand back.
Hi. Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much. So the next person to actually demo something is John McCarthy. So hi, John. Can you show your screen, please?
Hi. Yes. Hello, Shakib. Let's see. What can you see?
Yeah. So we can see your phishing
Attack demonstration. Good. I'll put my camera on as well if you want, so people can see that. So good evening, everybody. It's my honor and privilege to give you a demonstration tonight on what I think is a particularly sad turn of events, in the fact that social engineering attacks since COVID have risen dramatically, and there have been many instances of people performing all sorts of horrendous social engineering attacks, from people who will knock on your front door and say that the NHS hasn't got enough funds to complete patients' treatments, to what we're about to see here, which is a demonstration of a phishing attack that we will probably all have encountered during our working days. And what I've set out to do with this demonstration is, I thought it was very important that you can see from both sides of the attack what's actually happening. So the first part of the demonstration, it will be an ordinary user going about their regular daily practice, and then the second part of the demonstration shows what's actually happening from the attacker's side as they open the phishing email. So we should, this hopefully should give you a perspective on what's happening, and perhaps some of the innocent things that we normally do on our day-to-day basis that appears innocuous can actually cause quite serious problems in terms of how people can exfiltrate data or damage our systems. So as you can see here, I'm part of the BCS IT Leaders Forum, and it's a forum that does a lot of engagement with IT leaders across the entire industry sector. And I would encourage you to get more involved in this. If you would like to be a member, then please come and visit our website, which is a link off the main BCS website. We are a friendly bunch, and we're always encouraging people to join us. So please do so. We'd be very happy to see you. So with that, let's just begin the demonstration. So as you can see, I have a nice intro screen. So let's have a look. So the first thing that you can see here is a regular worker, and they're going about their daily duties. And what you can see on this screen is somebody's looking at the payroll details of people in an organization. And you can see there's a list of people that are there. Then, quite normally, you can see that an email has appeared, and that email is about COVID regulation changes. Now, as I said to you earlier, this is one of the most prevalent forms of attack that has been happening. And so all of the attack vectors that we're displaying here are ones that are current and have been used and are relevant to what's happening at the moment. So as you can see, we've got an attachment, and we've got a Word document with some new COVID-19 regulations. And at this point, we will just open up the document, and it says here, in order to do this, we just kind of enable the viewing. So we've done that, and that's it. Document is now been opened, nothing's happened, and probably a great many users at this point would then say, wow, you know, that was a complete waste of time. I've just managed to open a document, nothing's happened, and would proceed to carry on with their normal working day. The screen that you see before you now is actually one from the attacker's perspective. And I believe that many of you who are attending this webinar will be familiar with different sorts of operating systems. And what you can see in front of you here is Kali Linux, and we're using Metasploit, which is a tool that you can use to launch these sorts of attacks. So I'm just going to walk you through what happens at this point so that you can start to see how things look. So we've launched Metasploit, we're going through, we're looking to actually listen on a particular port, which is 443, which any of you will know will be HTTPS, and we're looking for it at a particular IP address. And we've started what's happening in the background. So now it's now, this computer is now listening in the background and thinking, I'm waiting for a connection from a particular area that I can then come in and launch my attacks with. The email that you see in front of you is a generic email that you could use. This one uses Guerrilla Mail, but you could, these things would often hijack mail servers and send out tens of thousands of these and so on. But this is just an example of how you could do that. And you can see here, if you can see my mouse, that the COVID regulations doc is already set as an attachment. We send it out as the government team, and we send this. As part of my commercial work, I have been sending out quite a lot of these in terms of phishing tests, and I have to say they are extremely successful. It's not been a particular problem. So there we are. The mail's been sent, and we are now waiting for the victim to actually open that email. And as you can see, they have now opened the email, and we are now on the attacker's machine. So you can see here that we're looking for a pathway, and we can see that we're in a temporary directory. The next part of the demonstration is us actually just navigating our way through to be able to see what's available. So we're in the users directory, and now we're going to go into the user. Let's see. Now we're going to navigate to their desktop. We're going to list the contents of the desktop, and we can see there is a pay details Excel file, which is the one that we saw the victim working on earlier. Now, we actually issue a command now to bring that file from the victim's computer onto the attacker's computer so that they can now steal those details. Now we open our file structure system here, and you can see then that we now actually have the same document with all of the payroll details that we were previously on the attacker's desktop. So the key element of this is that all of those actions occurred without any knowledge of the victim. They opened the email, they looked at it quite innocently, they closed it all off again, and in doing that and in enabling the Word document, they set up the process that would allow the attacker to then gain access to their PC, navigate through the file structure, obtain confidential documents, and then bring those documents back to their computer. And of course, they could do what they like with this. They could have done many other things at the same time. They could have written documents, they could change documents, they could have done all sorts of things. But this brief example was really just a way of being able to demonstrate what happens underneath the hood when we look at a phishing attack. It's quite easy to just treat these things as very blasé, and I just wanted you to see the potential damage that we can have. And that can occur when we go through some of our daily operations. This is particularly important when we are working in the dispersed workforce that we are currently in. So for example, your cat can walk in, your kid can come and pull your hair, the dog's barking, the front doorbell rings, whatever. So our focus and our concentration is not going to be as aligned as perhaps it might be in an office environment. And that wonderful training that we had about social engineering and dealing with phishing emails has now kind of slipped out of our minds because we've got a new IT setup, working in a new environment. We're probably not used to working at home or not used to working at home all the time. And so all of these factors together make it an ideal scenario for an attacker, and a social engineering attacker in particular, to mount an attack against someone like yourself who feels unfamiliar in that environment. So a little bit later, when we go through the Q&A, I will talk about some of the ways in which we can actually mitigate these sorts of attacks. But as I say, sadly, there's been a colossal rise in phishing attacks and social engineering attacks, and COVID has been the #1 topic in relation to that. And in the commercial work that I've done, where I send out tens of thousands of these phishing emails to large organizations, this really works. This is the one they're going to go for. So at that, I would like to say that is the end of my demonstration. It's been a pleasure, and I'd like to hand back over to Shakib, who will now be bringing on our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you very much, John. It scares me what can happen very, very quickly. So the next speaker, sorry. Yeah, the next speaker is David. Hi, David. Yep. So can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I always fall foul of that one.
All right. Thanks very much, David. It's over to you.
All right, thank you. And good evening, everybody. So thank you, I guess, first of all, to the previous two speakers, insightful information. And in fact, we're going to echo what they have been saying going through my next piece. So my name's David Overton. I am a business transformation lead at ALTIATECH. And we're going to talk here about a couple of things, but mainly about the solution we put in place for the NHS and how it helped Worcester Acute move to a remote access solution so very rapidly through COVID. So let's kick off. A brief agenda. We're going to do a very short introduction to ALTIATECH, followed by our modern workspace solution, and then the rest of the time we're going to be talking about the project for that was delivered for Worcester. So ALTIATECH has been around for 7-8 years now. We were originally set up by an excellent guy called Monser Ali, and we have basically grown year on year by providing great solutions to customers where we listened to their problems and actually delivered solutions that met or beat expectations, always focusing on the business outcomes and doing it whilst in a very transparent and trusted and collaborative process. And in fact, that will show itself as we go through talking about the solution we delivered for Worcester Acute. Obviously, if you want to know more about ALTIATECH, we have our website, or ask us in Q&A or contact us afterwards. So we were given a brief by the Trust, and the brief was in many ways quite simple. They had experienced a number of remote access systems that didn't work. They wanted a remote access system that did work. Now, given the variety of users, anything from very IT literate people to some people where IT was still a scary experience, the first requirement was it was something which was very easy to use. The users didn't have to sit down through hours of training, so it had to be intuitive and had to be something that was a natural progression from them from using their current devices. It had to have the capability to deliver remote access to any application they required, any file they required, any intranet or internet site and so on, but all through a secure solution. The security is very paramount. Obviously, we don't want patient records leaking. So not only did we have to be able to demonstrate that external attackers couldn't access patient data, but also that we could audit it, that we could demonstrate who did do what, and that we could respond should there be any questions about activity of particular users or accounts or files or applications and so on. And this has to be provided on demand. And then finally, as is often the case with the NHS, and for good reason, is we had to deliver a solution which was very competitive from a total cost of ownership point of view. And so that brief fitted very nicely with the solution that we offer at ALTIATECH. And that solution is called the Modern Workspace. And the Modern Workspace is a combination of Office 365 hardware and, in this case, software from an organization called Wingu. And it basically is a modern workspace that gives you secure access to everything you need to do your job, all within a browser. So in simplicity, we are able to give access to any application, any intranet site. If you've ever worked with the NHS, you may understand that some applications run on browsers that are heavily customized or have heavy dependencies, we're able to deliver all of that. But as I say, it's just done through a web browser. This means it works on any device. So we have had gaming machines, we've had family iPads, as well as even people's desktops and so on. But the key thing here is there is no software that you download. You use a browser and that's it. No plugins, no downloads, which means if you're in a restrictive environment, things still work. From a security point of view, the solution is able to tell you which location people are connecting from, which devices, and keep track of all of their activities that are appropriate for us to keep track of through the system. Now, one of the other choices which customers get to make is around which cloud they want to have Modern Workspace delivered from. So some customers like Worcester will choose to go for private cloud using their own technology and solutions, and that's what we did at Worcester. Other customers will want to work with a public cloud, be it Amazon, Google, or Microsoft Azure, and we're able to deliver exactly the same solution in those environments as well. But as I say, not only do we give you this solution with a Wingu, we also tie it together with investments that organizations are frequently making around Office 365 and devices. So we make sure that it all comes together and works seamlessly. Earlier on, Paul was talking about the need to rationalize and consolidate some of the solutions given to customers. We can participate in that to make sure that everybody only has the devices and solutions they need rather than having 3 or 4 solutions. And obviously, we always deliver this in a situation that reduces the cost and the TCO to customers. We will sometimes find that we will be just 20% of the cost of alternative solutions from a TCO point of view due to the way in which we put together our solutions. So great cost and delivers everything that customers need. That's sort of the summary of the solution. In terms of what it looks like to an end user, is we give them a familiar set of interfaces, and this became very important as we worked through the solution with Worcester. So you sign in with a username and password. If there is a need for multi-factor authentication, that can be provided here, so you can choose just how strongly you authenticate each user. And once they are signed into their browser, they then see a common set of applications. And the nice thing about this is for most users, the ability to go to a URL, type in your username and password that you would be used to typing in onto your work computer, and then clicking on an icon that you would recognize from your work computer. Doing all of that together is actually what we're able to deliver through the Modern Workspace experience. So rather than doing a live demo, because live demos are always risky, I seem to have a habit of making them break, I thought I would show you what my screen looked like yesterday when I was working on the Trust solution. And here, for example, we have 4 applications. They can run side by side. They can run on different monitors. We find quite often people run 2, 3 monitors, and that's absolutely fine. That works with this. But you can see here the variety of departments. So we've obviously got endoscopy and their GI reporting tool. So the capability for the endoscopy specialist to be writing reports, working with users, no matter where they are, was brought to them through the Modern Workspace and Wingu solution. We have the PACS gateway, which is used by various groups throughout the hospital. Obviously on the left here, we've got Badgernet, which is a maternity solution. And then the last thing, I guess, to point out here is the fact that because we sit on the intranet, in terms of where we actually run as a solution, it's accessed through the internet, but we are sat as a user on the intranet. We can also do things such as access any intranet web page, such as the Worcester ACUTE intranet shown there. It's worth pointing out that the PACS Gateway application, even though you could be running this on an iPad, has a requirement for Internet Explorer and a specific set of legacy ActiveX plugins. None of that matters. The end user just has to use a web browser and they get access to all of the applications they want and need from a medical point of view. From an audit point of view, you may remember I said that we monitor every time the user logs in, every application they run, and so I've given you some very brief samples of audit screens here. But you also may notice that by default everything is anonymized, so whilst I can go and see which applications are run, I don't know by default which client device or which application it is, which means that I can go look for suspicious behavior and then actually go and identify the users or devices behind it if that is an appropriate part of the solution. So We have a solution which keeps all your data safe because you're logging in from a browser. No data actually goes down to the end user computer. So you could look at 1,000 medical records, you could be tracking all of that, but none of that would ever reside on the computer. So the Metasploit expectation, which was shown just now, wouldn't actually see any files to attack. So that's great. So we avoid that that type of attack. And obviously, if the user loses a device or a child comes along and logs onto the device, unless they had the username, password, and the multi-factor authentication access solution, they wouldn't be able to access any data. So a very safe, secure, and highly audited solution. And so with Worcester, we were going through a very standard process. We defined a project, we delivered a proof of concept. We agreed that we needed just 20 applications to deliver on the majority of the trust remote access solution. And we were actually waiting on a third party that the trust outsourced to upgrade their network, provide us with the go live hardware, and move from the proof of concept system to business as usual and production. So life was going very well. The road had a few curves in it, but overall it was going nicely. And then that had to be thrown in the bin. It was nice and simple. All of a sudden, we were in a new world. COVID changed things very rapidly. So the first thing which we were told, we were given a call, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday, and it was like, "Hi, David, how are you doing?" Yep, really good. So you've heard about this COVID stuff? And it's like, "Yes, I've heard about the COVID stuff." They said, "Great, we need to run faster." It's like, "Okay, so are we going to get the new stuff that we were planning on or anything else?" I said, "No, none of that. We just need to run faster." It's like, "Okay, how much faster?" "Oh, we need to be live for 1,000 users 4 or 5 days from now." So all of a sudden, we went from a very predictable plan where we were waiting on third parties to all of a sudden in a situation where it was we needed to deliver in a matter of days, beyond scope, and as fast as possible. And that also meant we had to deliver to a greater scale than we had originally planned. We had to use hardware that was never designed to go into production. And if I just open up these two charts here, you can see that we went from having a few hundred people occasionally using the system. So you can see how frequently they used it by the concurrent usage on the right-hand side, all of a sudden to thousands of people using the system in any given day. What we also found was the timeframes when people use the system changed significantly. Instead of being a 9-to-5 system, this was now suddenly a 24/7 solution. And luckily, the solution which we had delivered enabled us to turn on a coin and deliver that for the customer. But that wasn't all that changed. It also went from 20 well-known applications that have been through a proof of concept solution into we now need to deliver over 100 applications. It's still got to be done at that same pace that we were talking about before. Oh, it's got to be done completely contactless. So we're no longer going to meet, discuss how things work. We would often find that something as simple as exactly how to install an application would be spread across many departments. Quite often the application knowledge was in each department that the application belonged to. And of course, those people were not just dealing with IT, they were dealing with all the other aspects that COVID was bringing. So whilst we're sat here focused on the IT impacts of COVID, they were focusing on the real life impacts that COVID was having on their department and how they were having to support patients throughout the hospital trust, either at home or in the trust themselves. And so as we got our head around this all spun everybody's head as we had to do it. What we found ourselves delivering was a massive scope increase, 5 times the number of applications, different hardware, different network. For example, we were now trying to get over 1,000 users through a 100 megabit pipe. That does not give a great experience. As a result of that, we had users now logging on at 3 a.m. So the traditional working day and the support for the solution went from being till 9 till 5 to 3 a.m. through to 1 a.m. That was the typical working day that we were finding the system being used. And every scope increase that came along was delivered on the basis of continuous improvement. So instead of a traditional project where it goes through planning and then we go through a sign-off committee and the like, all of a sudden it was a case of we need this delivered tomorrow and we'll deliver it, and then okay, we've done that, we've seen what we've achieved, but now we need to change something. And so we went through a continuous improvement process as opposed to a traditional waterfall process for the project. But we did it. And we did it, which meant that in 4 days we had 1,000, 1,500 users instead of a few hundred users using the system. And instead of users using the system for an hour or two, they were using it for 9, 10 hours remotely. But what's more, we never got to roll out the training plan. So we were able to demonstrate that asking people to sign in with their username and clicking on that icon, the experience was so familiar for them that they didn't need training. So we had a system which was simple to use and easy to use. We had a system which gave massive growth overnight. So we went from a few hundred users to thousands of users. We were able to provide a system which was completely secure, no breaches, no security issues. We've been working with their MFA solution, and we're able to keep the cost per user very low. So Ben Keller, who is one of my lovely colleagues at the Trust, who's responsible for clinical coding and remote working for his team, he said that he'd worked with VPNs in the past, for example, as one of the many remote access solutions he'd used in the past, and they actually stopped his productivity. And he said with the solution we were able to give, he was working in a familiar environment and he could give the 100% that was required. Him and his team were able to work all the hours they needed to enable them to get where they needed to. And we have similar stories from pathology and maternity and endoscopy and the teams who work with eyes, because I can't remember what that department's called. All of them were working and able to deliver what they needed because we were able to give them what was needed in the solution. But there was also some lessons learned, and these will echo the comments that Paul made earlier on, for example. So communications is still key. So we were running much faster. We were running and making decisions in environments which people just weren't used to, where decisions were being made without necessarily all of the contacts and fail-safes and just collaboration that the Trust would normally do, where things would go through paper processes and sign-off committees. That all got stretched very thin. So Teams and Slack and Zoom, because different organizations use different processes, all became vital to how we work. Trust was also vital. It wasn't possible to do everything on the basis of, we're going to give you a contract which is going to cover that, we're going to give you a purchase order or a statement of work. It was a case of, okay, this is an email, it says we're going to try and deliver these things, we're dependent on these things, if you can try and help us with the dependencies, we will deliver a solution. And in almost every case, we were able to do that without any issues. But as I said before, this continuous improvement process kicked in, which meant we might do exactly what we said we were going to do, but it had an unexpected consequence due to the speed at which we were delivering. And so that would then be picked up through a continuous improvement process. But whilst we're doing all of this, it's still important to understand that planning happened. It just happened much faster, and the team at ALTIATECH was able to deliver all of the planning that was required. In fact, we were still able to drive the customer and their third-party organizations at a fast pace such that we could do this, and things happened as they were supposed to happen. We weren't just shooting from the hip. But obviously, it's worth mentioning that the people who were having to undergo the most change were the end users who had been sat at a desktop at home and now were using their son or daughter's gaming rig for their work in a safe, secure environment. And that was driven by the support team at ALTIATECH, but also the simplicity of the Awingu software. Because users can type in a username and password, if it is their standard username and password, because we integrate into their existing system, even though we were rushing them to change, they're able to adopt it because the solution was easy enough to learn. They didn't have to learn lots of new things. You know, username, password, click the icon, and then their world was familiar. The fact it was running in a browser was irrelevant for them. And I think the last lesson learned is when you make the right decisions up front, and in this case, it was to use a private cloud and to use Awingu, it makes everything much easier because we planned properly at the beginning. Everything that we had to do, taking a project plan and squeezing it into days instead of weeks, suddenly became much easier. So I'd like to remind everybody that we have a questions box if you'd like to start typing your questions in, not just for me, but also for the rest of the panel. And if you type those in, we'll go through those in a moment. What I will say is we do have available the full case study. And obviously, you'll be getting the slides, you'll be able to get the link, but it's on the screen for you if you want it. So you can access the full case study for Worcester. And if you'd like to know more about our modern workspace solution, there's also a link there. But I think it's time that I hand back to Shakib and we move on to Q&A.
Hi, David. Thanks. Can the other speakers turn on their cameras so we can have the panel session? Welcome back. Let me just change. So can you stop sharing your screen, David?
Yes, I can.
Whoops.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we've got 1 or 2 questions coming in. While they come in, I've got a few questions myself. Very interesting. So we've gone from pain to solution, you know, and a deep dive into how challenging, you know, social engineering can be, and not understanding you're being socially engineered and, you know, compromised. So let's start off with, so we're talking about digital adoption. And so this question is for Paul. So what are the challenges for digital adoption for the NHS or any organization?
Yeah, I think that the challenge is really, particularly for a massive organisation like the NHS with, say, about 1.5 million workers. It's about funding. It's about the governance. It's about the national priorities. It's about standards, and so it really does need large-scale investment, working where there are many stakeholders, all with different leaders and different organisations, whether you're in social care, you know, whether you're in the county council, the district council, and so it's about how you bring all of these organisations together and enable a common shared goal that goes beyond the organisation. That's the difficult factor for the NHS, that it isn't just one organisation.
Thank you. Any ideas, John?
Wow. I'm sure David has a few.
Yeah. Okay. So you got nothing to add, or so we pass it on to David.
Please do.
Yeah, David.
God blimey, it's difficult. You know, I saw so many changes within the trust as we went through this adoption. I think every rule in the book went out. As I said, we had rigorous processes which were thrown out. We found there was an openness to invest that hadn't. It's not that the trust hadn't been there to do it, but the government hadn't been there to do it. I would say so much changed as we went through this. Almost everything that you would take for granted as processes you'd have to operate within the public sector all got thrown out, fiscal and otherwise.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a question for you, John. So what kind of steps can we take as a person or organization working from home? You know, is antivirus going to stop all of this shenanigans, or is there a bigger thing or more important thing that we should be doing?
Yeah, antivirus has a role to play, but it won't mitigate against all of these attacks, purely and simply because you can change the signatures on these things quite simply, and then resend the same thing again. So the questions that we have to kind of bring into our mind are the questions that I was mentioning, or the situation I was talking about during the presentation. That is, we're in an alien environment. We're not used to working at home. It's alien as in the fact that it's a work environment at home. And we need to stop and think. We need to, before we open an email, we need to think about it, check who it's from. Ideally, look at actually who the email address is from before we take any actions like opening the email. And you know, I'm an expert. I am literally an expert in all of these things. And you catch me on a Friday at 5 to 5, and I want to go out, or I've had a busy week, or whatever, you know. Because the reality is that people always believe that it's everybody else will get fooled by social engineering and not themselves. And I've certainly been a victim of social engineering. And I would like to think that you know, it's just a matter of trying to keep the rational check procedure in place at the time that we take those actions, because that's what they build upon, is the ability to be able to say, you know, you must do it now, you must do it quickly, or you know, there's consequences if you don't do the following, then we're going to be in a position to do things. So really that's my answer.
All right, thanks. And so I fully appreciate what you're talking about. So if the people were running in a VPN in a secure tunnel, would they still be able to capture that information if you clicked on that link?
Depends where they open the email.
Right. Okay. Because that's quite important, because VPN is one technology, but then it becomes very heavy on your target organization. Having 1,000 VPNs running is just a nightmare. All right, that's good.
So I've actually, so having experienced that, it's worth understanding that the trust, emails is opened up on the client device, not inside the Owingu application, which means even if the client computer is compromised with the exploit that John showed, none of the files actually are in the browser, so they couldn't actually see what we are delivering through the managed workspace solution that we have at ALTIATECH. So actually that would be one way to alleviate it, because the browser is just a pane of glass. There's no files in it. It's just a viewing screen. So far we have been able to avoid all of those issues by behaving that way. And so there are ways to mitigate it, but as John said, a lot of it is user education at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you very much. So, well, because you've answered that, I'll go back to Paul. So, Paul, what were the key challenges around COVID and remote working that the NHS have to consider?
I think the priority was to focus on the key services that had to be delivered and ensure that we quickly changed the organisation to be able to meet the response of what was now core. And a lot of the challenges were, how do we have all these remote workers able to communicate with each other? And so Microsoft Teams became the answer for a lot of those requirements. But then it was the reliance on paper systems that we have, whether they're paper records. Now, not everyone has these. So some have moved to digital records, but where those there was a reliance on clinic letters, on paper, then it's how do you make that paper available to people? And so there were quick workarounds to manage without the paper. And I think to some extent there's no going back now.
Okay. So I know that you didn't use Owingu or anything else. So what was your kind of secure connection from a worker to the NHS Trust?
Now, I don't know the answer to that because we've got IT directors that have handled that. All that I know was what was absolutely critical to us was that there is the VPN that is NHS Net that enables us all to have secure email addresses and to be able to communicate securely. But there are a range of different technologies, and one of the interesting things is that the likes of NHS Digital, who manage the service, are constantly testing us to make sure that we are mindful of phishing attacks that John set out, and they will send us little traps from time to time to ensure that we learn.
Yeah, well, it's the only way, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so David, so what was the biggest challenge in delivering us this kind of a solution at scale? Because it seems like, you know, you've got less than a week and it's 1,000 users. It's 5 times the size of your original proof of concept or your original delivery program.
Yeah, there were several challenges. I think the biggest one, or the biggest two, was that our production hardware wasn't ready, which means that you're running it on a solution which isn't designed to run it. So we didn't have high availability for the first 2 months. So if something fails, it fails. And the other one was our network, you know, getting 1,600 users through a 100 megabit pipe. Most of us have got 5 to 30 megabits at home for a single user. And all of a sudden squeezing several hundred users down that at once was a very big challenge. I think the reason why we had workers starting at 3 a.m. was because they knew that they'd get a better response out of the system from sort of 3 to 9 than they would do 9 to 5, if I'm honest. And it would have been nice if we didn't have people having to work on that. But the good news is that the proof of concept hardware, you know, was reliable hardware. It just wasn't beefy enough. So we were able to give people a 95% quality or a solution which was 100% 95% of the time. Obviously, we'd rather give people a solution which is 100% 100% of the time. yeah, it was just making small things work much bigger than they were designed to.
Okay. And John, just quickly, what are the kind of things that we can do to protect ourselves? Right, so we talked about antivirus. What are the things that we can do?
From an end user perspective, which is, I think, what the question is, so our daily user, is just be vigilant. Try not to just treat open an email as a blasé issue, but make sure, as I say, you look at who the email's from, and do you believe that this email is genuine? And also think about the preview pane in some of your email clients can actually enact some of the viruses without you actually opening the email. So turn your preview pane.
Oh. So again, there's another question for John. This is coming from James McCarthy. So to what extent does multi-factor authentication protect from phishing attacks?
I don't know how to say it really, none.
None.
You know, I mean, we can go through a whole procedure of validating who you are, and then you click on a phishing email, and then you open the, you know, essentially it's the end user that launches the attack. I mean, we have another question comes in there about using the Metasploit framework with Windows 10 and using the firewalls and how do they protect it. Well, answering both questions together, authentication validates you who you are, and multi-factor authentication does that multiple times. But once you've reached your email client and you download that email and open it, and in this particular instance, it was going out to report 443, which is, for the geeks in the world, HTTPS, so it's web encrypted traffic. So 99.9% of firewalls in the world will have that port open, because otherwise people couldn't do any form of e-commerce traffic. Now, you could argue that you could close it. No, even if it's initiating the inside. So it is very challenging and very difficult for people to be able to stop that. This is why, you know, I have to come back to an important point with this really for me, and that is 95% of all security budgets are spent on technology. Yes. And over 80% of all attacks are successful because they breach humans. Yeah. And until we redress that balance, we're not going to get anywhere. You know, it's really easy to send out 1 million phishing emails, and if 0.001% of them are successful, it's worth my day's work.
Yeah, no, that's really good to understand. And that actually leads on, just as a side thing, our next event on the 15th of September is actually about the human factor, about social engineering at the human level. So tune into that. So Paul, have you seen more adoption of electronic signatures during COVID, like something like DocuSign?
You'd think I would, wouldn't you? But no. I'm still sent things to sign. I sign them using DocuSign, but I think I'm the only one that does. People are not signing things. A lot of the sort of meetings that I take part of, like board meetings, then we rely on the minutes for agreement and approval and so on. But I'm very conscious that there's a lot of wet signatures being used still. There is some ability to electronically sign things, but they are within systems rather than something like DocuSign. But I would have expected to see DocuSign or products like it take off more in the public sector, and I expect to see that at some point.
Okay, so Ian Henderson asks, the NHS is a group of services held together by those who work within it. Without them, the whole thing would fall apart. Do you think that technology will help them glue things together? And I think this is, you know, focusing on that digital adoption. You know, can you have a 100% secure working digital NHS, or will there always be humans involved?
There will always be humans involved. The work that I've done on, with AI over a number of years in the past with large organizations has led me to believe that AI maybe removes some of the, at the moment anyway, removes some of the repetition. It helps you find normals in images, but and it maybe flags abnormals. But what it doesn't do, if you use it wrongly, you end up with people that are de-skilled and don't know what normal looks like anymore. But also, I think the key to what you're asking me really is that the NHS is it's about people and it's about buildings. What digital does is to enable it to be less about buildings and more providing access into patients and citizens' homes, to provide care across the continuum of healthcare, and to take care closer to the patient. And so digital is a huge enabler to give less reliance on the buildings, more ability to share information, but people are going to be more and more critical. And we see some acknowledgement of that at the moment in the huge drive to train and recruit more nurses. So I think what it will enable, what the technology enables, is for more patients to be seen more quickly, and for those with abnormalities, or sorry, for those who show no abnormalities, to be quickly taken out of the system. You're fine, all's good, and so that the NHS can focus on where the care is most needed.
Okay, so one of the things is, with these kind of processes and remote access and everything else, if the NHS is short-staffed, so you've got clinical coders and other people who do assessment at a distance. So would this remote working help you guys to rebuild your NHS with remote workers? Because at the moment, before COVID, we were bringing nurses and people from overseas across to the UK, recruiting globally. So would we be doing a similar kind of recruitment campaign, but for remote workers overseas?
It enables remote working, certainly, but I think critical to the caregiving process are people, and so there are still not enough carers around to take up all of the posts that are available and will be available. And I think that with the amount of subspecialization that's happening of clinicians, there is a niche there for a part of the patient journey to be provided by technology, to handle the initial query, to route the query, and to enable documentation of the patient encounter. And things like clinical coding can be done from a plain conversation, and that encounter can be coded. I think we're going to see more of that, but I think there is still the technology of healthcare, which obviously isn't just digital stuff. It's also around treatment regimes. It's around medication management, and I see that technology has a huge part to play in all of that. But at the end of the day, healthcare is about people, and patients want to be told about their illness by a person.
Okay, thank you very much. So here's a question for David. So I'm not sure whether you answered that, but Jackie asks, how do you keep the client from becoming the gateway to a cyber attack?
So actually, that's a really important question, and I've seen it in a number of my customers over the years, where especially if you're using something like a VPN solution, then that's exactly what happens. I've worked with public sector, hospital and commercial organisations, all of them, where that's happened. One of the nice things about the solution which we provide is it is not a two-way solution by default. We can enable singular file transfers to happen, but they're always driven by our system in the center, which means there is no way for a rogue process to go and say, use the tunnel which is built through your web browser and send a file back. Wingu just doesn't work that way. The modern WORKSPACE solution doesn't work that way, which means we have survived penetration tests, we've survived cyber attacks and so on. When I look at our solution, obviously we're designed for Worcester Acute Hospital. 99.9% of the staff for Worcester Acute are based in the UK, and we have about 15,000 connections that aren't necessarily UK based every day that get blocked by the solution. So it's designed to stop your web browser being able to push back in, and that's because at the end of the day it's a web page. You know, that's what the user's running. You know, when you go to any other web page, you don't somehow manage to attack the server behind it if it's well designed, and that's true for the managed workspace solution and a Wingu.
All right, fantastic. So I've got a question for David. I think it's for David, that anybody can answer, and I don't really understand it, but I'm going to ask anyway. So this is from Tahir. Could you explain how the MSF working with Windows 10, where we have a firewall and other security protection?
That's the Metasploit framework one. I dealt with that earlier. But he also asked another question: as if we tried to execute payloads on Windows 10 from he asked me in a controlled laboratory environment. Absolutely, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, it's part of what I do.
All right, so we've run out of questions. I don't know if anybody's out there who's listening and has some questions, please add them to the question list. Otherwise, I'll have to think of a few more quite quickly. It's all good fun. Let's have a look here. Yeah, so actually, if we're coming to the end and nobody's asking any questions, so why don't we just go round the speakers and say 3 things that they should consider within the the segment that you've been talking about to improve either decision making, security, or access to work, David. So I'll start off with Paul. What are the 3 things around decision making around remote access and COVID and everything else that you say people should, consider?
I'll tie it into Jackie Hogan's question as well, because she's saying, where do you start about designing or redesigning services and processes? Well, I mean, from my perspective, that's where it all has to start. Really, is what is the demand? What do patients need? Understanding epidemiology. What is the disease? Where is it in terms of the area of the country that you're focusing on? So in the southwest, we've got a high number of elderly population, and so you need to look at what does the service need, what particular disease groups have you got to deal with, and then look at the cohort of digital services, of digital systems and solutions that are available, and use that as a tool set to co-create with clinicians, with the public, with patients, how the services can be most efficiently and effectively delivered. So that's one of the key things for me is what is the tool set that you've got available to you to develop these services. I think another key aspect is the governance, and I include within that the cyber security approach. How are you going to ensure that these digital services are provided as safely and securely as possible? How do you ensure that the integrity of the records, particularly when you're taking data from a multitude of solutions, and the level of integration, whether you're using FHIR or HL7, then you need to make sure that you're only putting together the information that was legitimately provided. And so you need to make sure that you are working properly with a suite of suppliers and professionals who are experts in this field, and don't try to lash something together. The key to this, I think, for me, is about program management. It's about making sure that you've got people who know how to manage relationships with a cohort of suppliers. First of all, find those suppliers, and then how do you ensure that your digital solution brings the benefits that you anticipated, and how do you ensure that you've got the funding to enable all of that to happen? So that would be my sort of mashup of an answer to your question.
Fantastic, thank you very much. So John, to you.
Okay. In these wonderful times of COVID-19, every single person in this country knows how to wash their hands properly. Now, at the start of COVID, they didn't, but now they go between your fingers and you rub this and you rub that, and we know that basic hygiene practices are the most effective way to mitigate this sort of spread of disease. We need cyber hygiene. We need to understand some of the basic things, like if you find a USB device in a car park, it is not a free gift, right? Plug it into any device that you find nearby. And if it says when you plug it in, please reformat this to protect you against viruses, the virus is installing as you're reading it. Yeah. So those very, very basic things are a huge step forward to help us in this environment. And moving on from that, in terms of education and creating a cybersecurity culture that's based on the hygiene, it's very easy for IT people to understand how security works, or it's much easier for them. It's not easy for the end user. So if you then turn around and say, well, your 6-digit password has now got to be 14 digits long with 5 characters, uppercase, lowercase, so on and so forth. What you're actually going to do is alienate the people that you're trying to protect and the systems that you're trying to protect. So educate them, show them things like password crackers, give them demonstrations that show that if your password's weak, you can break it in a second, as opposed to putting an extra 2 digits on it will create so much more protection for your organization. And when they understand the reasoning behind it, they're far more likely to adopt it and come with you. So I would say have a foundation of cyber hygiene, build cybersecurity culture into your organization, and understand that that will always evolve. It might go forward, it may go back according to how people come and go, but always have that level of awareness there. That's what I'd say.
Thank you very much. David?
Well, killer question. I guess in some ways I'm going to echo some of what Paul and John have said. I think the first thing is you need to look at what your end users, your customers, from my perspective, actually need. I've gone into too many projects where I've been told what the answer is, as opposed to someone said, I need help solving this problem. And I think it's important we focus actually on solving the problem, not what somebody believes is. I must say that about half of the problems we solved through this rollout started off with someone saying, I know this isn't possible, but, and the answer was, yes, it is. We've done that lots of times. Oh, I didn't think you could. Oh, how do we get smart cards working? Oh, we just turn it on. You can do that. Well, we've stopped 7 projects because we didn't think you could. So focus on giving the specialists the task of solving the problem as opposed to trying to solve it for them. That would be my first go-to. The second thing would be do things collaboratively. So it's been quite eye-opener to have me, for example, working with 10, 12, 15 departments of the trust. Normally I would be kept within IT. And actually we solve so many problems by working together. So by speeding up communication. So that openness, that collaborative approach to the world, I think is vital. And I think the third one is just understand that, and this is echoing something Paul said, the NHS, so I actually thought it was so awesome, I wrote it down. The NHS achieves amazing things with a clear and common purpose. And so actually providing we're working on that basis, we do achieve amazing things. And so make sure we have a clear and common purpose, and then, end users will surprise you. Blockers will suddenly become friends, and so on. And so give us the problems because we're the experts. Let us tell you how we can solve them, and it's amazing how much easier life gets.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say a big thank you to Paul Richards, John McCarthy, and David Overton for supporting us in this event at this critical time with COVID. And hopefully our audience have learned some things. They most probably have more questions, or they can always follow up. What we're going to be able to do is this video will be hosted on the BCS YouTube channel, and also we will be sending out the presentations that people have made so that it act as a memoir. So it'll just remind you of things that you thought about or forgot about that you can take on into your daily lives, and hopefully create a more secure workplace for your staff, your employees. And I'd like to say thank you very much. And I think that's the end of this. I'm going to end the session and say goodbye to everybody. Thank you again.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, bye. So the question is, where's the, here we go, end seminar. Thank you, bye-bye.